Hi, I'm Richard, and today I'm joined by Morel Technology with Marcus and Matt. If you could go ahead and introduce yourselves, what do you do at Morel, and just let everyone know a little bit more about the company.
So Morel is a platform that allows any Square seller to build a really beautiful, great mobile app. And the thing is, it takes no technical expertise. You can do it in as little as 15 minutes, and you can have, within 24 hours, a great app headed for the App Store.
So yeah, I'm Matt. Marcus and I are founders of Morel, and we've been excited to tell you all about it.
Awesome. And so, what is the typical user that's like coming in and using Morel Technology?
So we really started with restaurants and like food and beverage. So that's where kind of our background was. Our goal is anyone that sells a Square could use Morel. We think that most companies don't have mobile apps right now, but that's mainly a function of access. It's not a function of they don't want them. And it's kind of interesting. A lot of people ask us, well, why does my business need a mobile app? And after explaining, even if it's just one coffee shop and they don't have a big chain, explaining all the benefits of customer retention and kind of increasing that lifetime value of a customer, they realize it makes sense. They just didn't have a way to do it before. Really, we see kind of any Square seller is someone who could benefit from an mobile app, from hair salons, restaurants, retail.
And maybe we could also explain why we initially decided to do this and work on the Square platform.
Yeah.
So Marcus and I think it was about 4 or 5 years ago, we met while we were both working with a coffee company in Montana. And we needed a mobile app, and we also needed to change our point of sale. And so we looked everywhere. We interviewed every single POS provider. And when we would interview the POS provider, we'd ask them, well, do you have a mobile app? Or where should we go to get a mobile app? And every time they would tell us, oh, well, we work with these third-party providers. So we started to go down the pathway of partnering with these third-party app providers, and we just realized it was complicated, it was difficult. The management of the app after you made the app was difficult. Someone else controlled it. The integrations with it, when it would break at times. So we just realized, why does this have to be so difficult?
Right.
And so we ended up actually deciding to build our own app for the coffee company. But that was when we realized, there's really this place in the market for companies who they're not Starbucks. They don't have $1 million a year budgets to build and manage these apps. But there needs to be something in between. There didn't seem to be for the small consumer. So that's really where Morel was born.
Building a mobile app is never generally like super easy. I happen to know that you're big on Flutter, and so you had worked with us previously on some of the stuff that we'd built on like our Flutter plugins, and I know that kind of sparked some interest. So how is it that you got this initially off the ground, and how did you get version 1 of Morel built?
Yeah, so started with 2 developers and we just started building it. And that's, I think, one of the coolest things about this industry in general is that you don't really need permission to start building. Mm-hmm. We started with Flutter because that's what we knew really well. And what's cool about Flutter is you can compile to the web, and you can compile to Android and iOS. You can also, by the way, do macOS, Windows, Linux. You can do anything now, even embedded systems. But for us, the web, iOS and Android meant that we could build apps for iOS and Android, 1 code base that would go to 2. So that cuts our development in half. But then also our editor could be Flutter Web, and we could put that app from iOS and Android into the editor. And with a little bit of coding, this part only took actually a couple weeks, we made it so that you could edit the app in real time, see the changes, and it wasn't like some previewer that we had to make. It was literally the code that would ship to the mobile app on the web, and you could see it live. That's really where it started, is let's build a really good app builder, kind of like if you know Squarespace or Wix or Square Online Store, right? All great options. We wanted to have that kind of interface where you could build it without any coding expertise, just pick some colors, pick some fonts, and have a mobile app.
So you built out this really great way of sort of having the what you see, what you get editor, and sort of getting a Square seller off the ground and getting the app design. But I'm also wanting to know a little bit more like how'd you get like that first like infusement of funds, and like, you know, how's that been sort of received as you've been working your way through getting things off the ground?
From the business side, you know, we really just started building it, like I said, developers building a proof of concept and can this work, but it really became a business when, so I was actually still in school. I took the 7-year plan. They don't advertise that one, but I was working while in school, and COVID certainly didn't help. But so I was still in school, and there were a bunch of competitions for students. So actually, I flew out here to Bay Area and competed, and we ended up winning 2 of them back to back, like within 2 weeks of each other, and had like $50,000 in just grant money that we could start to build a business. And, you know, obviously that's not going to pay someone's salary for a lot, but that's definitely enough to start building and start hiring. You know, we got a logo, and we you know, hired out some design help, and we really started to turn it into a product that we could sell. The other cool thing is at one of the competitions was a restaurant. It's called 5 on Black. It's in Montana. They have 5 locations across Montana. So this really awesome, you know, small chain of, it's Brazilian street food is kind of what they sell. Yeah. It's super good. And they were on Square. And so we're talking about all the benefits, and there's a Q&A session after, so I give my pitch. It was like a 10-minute pitch, and then there's a Q&A for 10 minutes or something like that. And the guy was a judge, and he raised his hand, and he said, this isn't really a question, but you can just tell your rounds later on in the day that 5 on Black is going to be a customer, like effective now. Wow. That was a good day, because that was our first real, like, someone wanted to pay us money for the product we made. And then from there, you know, the snowball effect I think is really real, where once you have a few business, it's hard because B2B sales I think is so hard because you're asking a business to trust your business, or I should say trust their business, their customers, their interactions with you. And you know, at the time we were like 3 guys just working on our free time on this thing in college, and we're like, yeah, trust. We'll don't worry about it. Your customers have a great experience, and it's a lot of trust to put in. So, but once one person does it, and that person is respected in their community of, well, if they did it, maybe, you know, we'll give them a shot. And it kind of, once you have a handful of early adopters that are willing to stick through it.
I think I'd also add that it was really, I think, vital and key that we both had experience in the food and beverage industry. So we weren't only, we knew what the customer needed really well. We'd been the customer. We'd been asking for the app. So we knew what we wanted, we knew what we needed. And so that's really where the business started, is in food and beverage. And we knew what they needed. And because we ran that business, that really gave us a leg up to then go right in and say, this is exactly what we know what you need. And they would agree, which is why the 5 on Black customers said, yeah, you're right, we need that.
One of those things that like I've always found is like there's these sellers that are sort of wanting to like find that way of bridging the gap from going from like a single location to multi-location. They might also be interested in having like a mobile app. And I think like you guys brought in experience of like what it is to like manage an app for multiple locations. I mean, that's one of the things that I really liked about like trying out Morel was like, if you have multiple locations, it's really easy to like select which ones that you're wanting to order from, and it's like you have a very like cohesive experience through that. Getting that first customer, what were like the things that you learned like as you were just like, you know, because I'm sure it's like you're building the plane as you're trying to fly it. What were those things that you like immediately started like realizing when taking on that first customer that you like either needed to fix in like the onboarding flow or like, you know, refactoring and sort of like the deployment process? What were some of those things that you first learned?
I think I learned really hard the lesson, don't over-engineer stuff, which everyone says, and I love to ignore. Like for onboarding flow, for example, this guy didn't really care how he onboarded because we were sitting next to him at the luncheon at this event, right? So, you know, he didn't really care how it came to be. He just wanted it to be good in the end, and he didn't want to take a lot of his time. And then same with like automatic deployments. You know, we had one app on the App Store, so we didn't need to automate all the deployment yet because it was one. We could do it on our computer. And so eventually we kind of had to build those systems to go to scale. But I think that was one of the hardest pieces, really focus on like customer experience. It's what in the end, you know, people don't care how it's built really. And all this Flutter stuff, I love to talk to you about all the cool Flutter, like, and it compiles to these 3 platforms, but they don't, you know, at least people running real businesses, restaurants and things that are customers, they just care what it does it work? Does it have a good experience? Does it provide me value?
Right.
And I think those are the things that we really focused on, is like, how do we actually increase customer retention with this app, and how do we show it? How do we demonstrate it so that when we go to 5 on Black, we can say, hey, look what this app has done for you. Like, it's paying off.
The first thing we also realized is that, several of our potential customers are not on Square. We quickly became very good Square salesmen. So because we can say, hey, well, if you're not on Square, you should be on Square for these reasons. And then we also became very good at helping people transition from not Square to Square, which meant we know all about the hardware. We know about, say, hey, it's easy to do. The other thing too, we had to really figure out really quickly was people are not building their menus, for example, in food and beverage in a way that would necessarily be conducive to an app all the time.
Right.
Categorizing, and so we had to think through that in the builder, as well as how do we approach every business so that when they come to us with a new set of products that they're selling, how we can help them very quickly organize those into a way that can quickly populate on the app that is useful when you're seeing it through an app.
No, I mean, it's a really good point, because like one of the things that I spend a regular amount of time with people coming into our developer community is they come in and they start using the catalog API, because they're like, hey, this is how you can like ingest a menu and start understanding like what a business is doing, and having to sort of like explain to a developer like the catalog is not necessarily customer facing. This is how a seller manages their business and like in the point of sale. So like this is a catalog for a point of sale, and so like you do have to sort of think through how things would display differently when you're like, well, I need to actually have like correct descriptions of the different things that you're selling and all the different modifiers that you're having, because these might all have like little shorthand codes in there.
Images are huge for apps, like really nice photography, and we've helped connect people to photographers to get that, because it's so important for when you're selling online or on the app.
Yeah.
So we've just realized how important it's been to connect those last little things to make the app actually work. You have to have the pictures, you have to have the descriptions, it has to be set up correctly. So we've gotten really good too at getting to that really quickly and getting them to proficiency.
I'll say custom attributes too helps a lot with that, because so one thing we have is the app name. So if your item is named something for inside the restaurant, but on the app you want to say something else, we just have the app name field, and that's a custom attribute. So the fact that you can edit that in the Square dashboard, super handy. The better integration you have with Square, the easier it is to just manage everything. You don't need to have your own systems that then a person has to learn. It's like if it's all inside Square, they know Square. So
when you were starting Morel Technology, you could have picked a bunch of different platforms. We know that there's plenty of other, payments APIs that exist out there. What kind of drove you to picking Square? I know that you previously had familiarity with it through working at a different company, but you could have picked something else. What kind of drove you towards choosing Square?
Well, I think it's a few things, because there's different payment providers. There's also, in the food and beverage world, lots of point-of-sale companies, like way more than I would expect the market can sustain, to be honest.
I think we researched POS companies for like a year before we picked one.
We did, for
the coffee company.
That we were at, that we learned about Square. And really, I think what Square is so interesting is that it's not really a point-of-sale company, and I'd argue it's not even really just a payments company anymore. May have started with that dongle, but there's so much more to it now that I think of it like a commerce platform. You can basically build any kind of commerce experience, and it's the back end that supports it. It's almost like the AWS, but just with payment, commerce, and things like the Orders API to be able to track orders across states, to have those webhooks so that it gets updated in appropriate places in real time, and then to be able to work with the Square point of sale, which itself is a great product. None of the other, certainly point of sale companies that we looked at, do that. They're basically a product that then has APIs because they need to be able to send orders and they need to have a menu pull, but that's their focus. And fundamentally, just in the food and beverage world, I think that point of sales they're not long for the world. I think that at-home dining and things like mobile apps, and obviously I'm probably biased about mobile apps, but online ordering and mobile apps and of course all the delivery, and also the self-order kiosks that you see popping up everywhere, where you don't necessarily have to just have the screen that the employee knows how to tap. What's the difference between a kiosk and a point of sale? Not much. It's just one's optimized for customer experience and it's intuitive, and the other one is unintuitive, I guess. It seems to me that there's going to be a convergence, and so I think focusing on that platform, that's really what we wanted. And for what it's worth, I think Square payments are also fantastic. The combining in-store and kind of physical payments, no one processes faster than Square. That Square reader, it amazes me how quickly you stick that chip in and it's like, take it out, it's done.
Yep.
So that's great. And then the online payments, for Flutter, that was huge for us because Square was one of the first companies to say, we have Reader SDK, we have in-app payments SDK for Flutter, not just like kind of support, but like real support from the company for those was huge. So I guess it's a lot of reasons, but.
Yeah, and I would just say like consolidation to one platform in Square, it's just simple. Everything works really, it's fast, it's consistent. We don't want to focus on anything other than what Morel provides. And that's where we feel like we can partner with a Square and have a really robust, we don't have any doubts or concerns about what Square is doing. We just build on top of it and we have total confidence. We don't want to be in the payment processing business. We don't want to be in anything else other than this. And we felt like Square is the most simple and straightforward solution.
Yeah.
So
I'll just add too, this is more like a meta idea, but we really see Square as just leaders in technology too, and how to design products that are good, simple, easy to use. The fact that they're just apps on the app stores and you can just download them, sign up. You don't have to go through a complicated sales process. You can, it even goes back to the start, that the fact that anyone can just have a card reader that works with their phone on any internet network. Right. It's kind of that simplicity in commerce. There's just so many companies that just provide these really specific solutions, but it like gums up the gears a little bit, where they say they're solving problems, but I think they're creating a lot more problems through integrations and things. So kind of that philosophy of building stuff, of engineering, that's something that we try to emulate our best at Morel. If we have another feature, we can't bring in a third-party partner and say, here, go sign up for this and sign up for this. Right. Like, it has to be all together. We'll OAuth to Square, but that's the only like integration we're going to do. Right. And so kind of that whole philosophy of it, I think, is really important.
Yeah, and I mean, like, the thing about the types of apps that you make available to sellers and how it sort of bakes into a lot of the things that we already offer. Like, a couple years ago, we released Order Manager, which is a way for them to be able to like manage, pickup, delivery, shipping orders directly in the point of sale. That's like a whole system that somebody doesn't have to build coming in here. Totally. And we've learned that from chatting with sellers, and like, when they do all these different delivery platforms, they have this like tablet farm where it's just like where all the different orders are coming in, and we realize like being able to just like have an order come in straight to the point of sale, they can manage it. Maybe it goes to their kitchen display system, and you offer like a client-facing app that allows it to just like basically push that order directly over there. Like, there's not a whole lot of other overhead for like managing the state of that order beyond that.
If you're already integrated with DoorDash, your employees know how to use Morel. It's the same thing. It just
right.
It just says it's from Morel and not DoorDash, but the process is the same. And when we tell restaurants that, they're a little bit shocked. They're like, we don't have to retrain. You just have it now. And I think that's really, really cool. And it's cool that Square opens it up so that our little company can appear, put orders next to DoorDash. Yeah. Like, I think that's that economic empowerment. Obviously, it goes to the end seller, definitely. But I think it's cool that Square's kind of created this developer community too, and empowering software engineers to build companies that can provide a commerce at a level that, PCI compliance alone is a huge legal undertaking. The fact that you can just say, and I think it's cool. It allows developers like us to focus on the really, what I think are the cool things in software development. Like, we're basically a front-end user interface company, and the magic black box of payment processing, we say, hey, go take a payment. And how does that work? How does that connect to Visa and go through all those channels in a way that's secure? I have no clue.
Well, speaking of technology, I do want to geek out a little bit on, the mobile apps themselves are built with Flutter. You're using Flutter for web for doing that whole, like, what you see, what you get editor. Tell me a little bit more about, like, your back end. Like, how are you sort of, like, keeping everything in sync? What, language framework are you using? Yeah. And, like, what platform do you primarily use for like hosting stuff?
Yeah. So right now we're entirely a Google Cloud shop, mainly because that's
makes sense with Flutter.
Makes sense with Flutter, right? One interesting thing we're using is Dart on the back end. So we liked to have one language. It's basically the same reason why JavaScript became so popular in the back end. Not because anyone likes JavaScript, but because...
I do, but...
Good. I'm glad there's some. They needed someone.
We need at least a dozen.
JavaScript's fine. It's fine. I think that's the reason it became so popular on the back end is because everyone was using it for the front end for the web. And so we kind of had a similar thing where there's lots of great languages that do back end really well, but we don't really know those languages as well. I mean, we know them, but like our Dart is our home. It's where we're comfortable. So we use Dart on the back end. We actually use a framework called Dart Frog, which is relatively new. Only 6-9 months ago that
I haven't even heard of that yet.
It's pretty small. Well, Dart on the server is pretty small. It's not really popular for that, at least now. But yeah, and then we connect to a Postgres database hosted in Google Cloud. So we have a few different jobs in the back end. One of the really interesting questions that we constantly answer, I don't necessarily have like a hard and fast rule for this, is what do we pull into our database and what do we just query directly to Square? And how do we optimize that? So things like catalog we pull into our database. We do maintain the orders that are placed through the app in our database, just for like an order history. It's easier to deliver that feature for us. And then things where, like the theming for the app and stuff that is specific to Morel. But a lot of the Square data, like one of the clients we're in the middle of onboarding has 300,000 customer profiles. So syncing those, like 100 at a time with the API. I can't remember the page limit is, but it's a difficult task, especially because if one of them drops, there's 100 customers that are even unhappy. So we're working on a way to do that robustly because ideally that's how we'd like to do it. But for now, we just query directly to Square for that. It's really pretty simple. It's just a REST API, the Morel API. We did make the decision so that all of our apps talk to one API. So there's not individual backends for like each restaurant because that we didn't think would scale super well. We run it on Google Cloud Run. So everything gets put in a Docker container and then deployed to Cloud Run, which is cool because it scales infinitely. We joke that if we had every restaurant in America sign up, as long as we don't get bigger than Google, we'll be fine. So exactly. I think we're safe. Exactly.
Sort of related to that, how is like gathering feedback and like feature development and like, product roadmap sort of worked for you so far? Like as you've been sort of bringing people on, because I mean, it seems like you'd probably have like two different types of feedback. There's like the customers of your customer, and then your actual customers' feedback. So like how is like that feedback process working for you, and like how do you sort of use that for prioritizing like what to develop next?
Mostly, we focused on trying to work with restaurants, with the actual kind of our customers, to see either what features they want, but then of course any bugs that happen. Because generally, the end user doesn't know that we're involved at all. We do have a little powered by Morel when you start up, but they don't know what that means. They just say, oh, well, I'm using 5 on Black's app. I'm going to go complain to 5 on Black, and then we'll hear about it. But we have a few other things that we've recently introduced that are helping with that. One, really good observability tools are so important, and I can't believe we operated for as long as we did without really good ones.
Hey, you got to get started somewhere.
Yeah,
right?
Exactly. We just integrated a tool called Sentry not that long ago, which will do just tell us when a bug happens. Basically, not every bug obviously, but anytime there's an exception thrown, we know about it. And so we cleaned up like 15 bugs a couple weeks ago that we didn't even really knew happened because they weren't big enough that a customer would be upset about it, but they were real, And so that, and then observing the back end, we use Google's cloud logging for all that. Well, and we actually now have in-app feedback. So after 5 minutes of using the app, it'll pop up and say, hey, what's your experience with this? Thumbs up, thumbs down, and then if you want, you can put a little bit of text. And so that also is starting to kind of help collect feedback directly from customers to get it back to us. The other cool trick we did with that is because we want to make sure that we can scale with that, so we have Google's natural language processing look at those text responses and basically tell us, is there any salient things? Like it pulls out entities that it identifies and the overall sentiment, and so we can use that to kind of track over time how positive people are. Of course, they'll give us a thumbs up, thumbs down, but what they actually type, I think, says even more than that.
Yeah.
And if there's a certain like phrase that keeps popping up in the entity analysis, it's like maybe we need to go check on, check out or something. So anyway.
Yeah, and I would add that just to your question about how do we prioritize what to focus on. So we're getting feedback all the time. Because we actually worked in the food and beverage industry, we have a pretty good idea of what are the core features that are needed. Loyalty is a big one, and we trying to gamify loyalty as much as possible, so it's a fun interaction for the customer. They want to come back to it. So we've started playing a lot with animations within loyalty. When you get points, how does that show through on the app? But then just listening to the customer and saying and trying to see if that is in line with what we think is best. I would say loyalty, number one, was our biggest focus. The ability to buy whatever you need through an app easily and quickly, loyalty, and then also gift cards and the way that we interact with digital Square gift cards. Those are our big features. We have other features on the roadmap right now. We think that an app should be a brand portal for every company. And so we have some features on the roadmap right now, for example, like where you can buy a company's merch. You can buy a sandwich, but then you can actually buy a t-shirt and have that shipped directly to your house.
Yeah.
Those are other features on the roadmap. But Square's mission of economic empowerment for everyone is really at its core is Morel's same mission, to provide the same kind of brand hub within your app that you can interact with in every way for any business.
Our buzzword for that is omni-channel. I think a different way of talking about it is like how so many businesses now are like multidimensional. Like they're not strictly within one category. They have food and bev, but they also have some retail. And like having an app like that sort of centralizes this thing into a hub to like do both the retail and the food business, like is kind of like how a lot of businesses are structured now. Like you think about like a hair salon, like they book appointments and they have services, but they also sell products.
They sell shampoo.
And
and they
exactly.
Sell,
Yeah.
So, like,
And by the way, if you had an ice cream while you're waiting, like now you do food and bev,
Exactly. If you could like start over from now, are there any things that you would do differently or like that you would recommend somebody like try to like sidestep if you were starting all over again?
Well, I think Morel is still feels like it's very much so starting.
Yeah.
So
Start over.
Yeah.
I guess maybe I'll do one maybe techie focus and one more businessy focus. I think the business focus it's just gonna be harder than you expect, especially B2B. Like I said, getting that trust is hard. You got to be in it. Kind of if you're gonna build a B2B, like if I'm just gonna release an app on the App Store for customers, like just normal people to use, maybe it's like a free download with an in-app purchase. I can try that out and see if there's take relatively quickly because there's really no cost to trying out an app, and if it sucks, I'll download it or delete it, and and that's good. But businesses don't have that option. Like if I had to go back and do it over, it's just be more prepared for that. Mm-hmm. We really, like I said, we started out as like plucky. Let's just go build something cool, and I think that's good. But just if you want to make money from it, it's going to be hard. And I think from the tech side, standards are so important from the very beginning. So for us, that means test coverage. In Flutter, you can achieve 100% test coverage, and it's really should be the standard. Like I'm kind of converted to a diehard 100% test coverage for Flutter stuff. Yeah. And we didn't start that way. And now we have 50,000 lines of code that are untested, and writing those, I mean, we've been working on it a little bit at a time for weeks, just trying to chip away at it. So those kind of standards, setting up code reviews really early, and things like localizations and things where, we have one client now that has mostly Spanish-speaking or customers, and our app doesn't translate to Spanish. And even things like, how do we translate their menu items from English and Spanish and things like that. We just had no solution for it, and it turns out there are so many strings in our app. Yep. And getting all that converted, it's a lot harder. And I know it's hard to know what the right standards are, so I think look for companies in your field that like publish blogs about that to try to learn them as best you can. But the more that you can set out early, I think that's something I'd change.
At the end of the day, selling is helping people. And so we don't want to sell anyone on a product. We want them to actually, it's like Five on Black, the Brazilian company in Montana, they saw like that's going to help our company. So that's how we just want to focus. I mean, I guess from the beginning, I think if we were to go back and start again, is just to look and say like with every customer that we're going to, like what helps them the most, and focus on that, as opposed to say you need exactly what we have made, although we feel like it does span the gamut on what people need. But I think just focusing more on every individual customer, because every one of them is a little bit different.
Well, thank you both for taking the time to chat with me today. I really appreciate it, and look forward to seeing more of what you deliver at Morel.
Awesome. Yeah, thanks for having us.